Not much is known about Zhang Yongming's life before he became a cold-blooded serial murderer. One of the few records on him states that, before the string of killings, he was arrested and convicted of a single homicide and sentenced to death in 1979, but after receiving sentence reductions, he was released in September of 1997. In early May of 2012, reports of missing teenagers in the Yunnan province of China sparked an investigation by the Ministry of Public Security. Through this, one of the teenagers, 19-year-old Han Yao, was confirmed to have been murdered. During the investigation, it was believed that all these young males had been attacked on a particular road near Zhang's home. Reports from residents of the village seeing Zhang hang plastic bags in his house with what appeared to be bones in them only aroused more suspicion from the authorities. His house was searched, and inside they found human eyes preserved in jars and dried flesh. It was rumored that he would feed his victims' flesh to his dogs, as well as sell the remainder at a local market, claiming that it was ostrich meat. Zhang was sent on trial for the murders, being unapologetic and having shown no remorse for his actions. He was found guilty and was executed on January 10, 2013.
The Long Island serial killer, or the Craigslist Ripper, is an unidentified serial killer who murdered 10 to 16 people in the Long Island area of New York within the span of 20 years. Before the investigation, police were looking for Shannan Gilbert, a 24-year-old New Jersey woman who worked as an escort and was visiting a client. Her driver, Michael Pack, watched Gilbert run out of the client's house and into the night. Pack tried calling 911 and asked the surrounding neighbors if they had seen her, but the trail ran cold, and she was officially reported as missing on May 1st, 2010. Then, in December of that year, during a routine training exercise, a police dog led an officer to a nearby area where it found the skeletal remains of a female in a burlap sack. From there, more bodies were found in the same area, leading the police to a full investigation. In only a few months, 4 more bodies were found, and the search area was expanded all the way to the county borders. September came around and a few of the bodies were identified, allowing police to release a few composite sketches of a couple victims. An unnamed Asian man and a Jane Doe, as well as some of the accessories worn by the victims, were released to the public, hoping that this would provide tips or a lead on this strange case. On December of 2011, the remains of Shannan Gilbert were found in a marsh not too far from where she disappeared. It's believed that she died by drowning in the marsh, which her mother and several others find hard to believe. Some of the neighbors do report seeing her run into the night screaming, as well as a 911 call from Gilbert begging for her life, that contradict the accidental death conclusion. Many suspects have come up in the case, and by 2015, the FBI was officially involved. However, the killer still remains anonymous. It's suggested that he is a man in his mid-20s to mid-40s, has knowledge of law enforcement which he uses to avoid being caught, and is very familiar with Long Island, more specifically, the South Shore.
Probably better known as the Cleveland Strangler, Anthony Sowell murdered 11 women in the Cleveland area from 2007 to 2008, and perhaps even earlier than that. In 1989, shortly after being discharged from his work with the Marines, Sowell met a 3-month pregnant woman at a motel. He convinced her to accompany him to his home, where he held her against her will, gagging her with a rag and raping her several times. Once Sowell retired to bed, the woman was able to escape and alert the police. He was found guilty for this attack and was sentenced to 15 years in prison, eventually being released in 2005. A few years later, he invited a woman he knew over to his house to socialize. Sowell turned violent, and then began to physically and sexually assault her. About a month later, the police showed up at his house with a warrant to arrest him for the sexual assault, but he was nowhere to be found. What they did find, however, were 2 bodies on his living room floor. 2 days later, Sowell was tracked down and arrested. Upon further investigation of his home, the bodies of 4 other women were uncovered, found in shallow graves in the basement and stuffed into crawl spaces. Then, digging in his backyard, uncovered 3 more bodies as well as the remains of a 4th victim. Finally, a human skull was found in a bucket in the house, bringing the body count up to 11. Sowell, charged with 11 counts of aggravated murder, was sentenced to death after a long and complicated trial period. He remains on death row to this day.
Todd Cole had a very troubled childhood. In preschool, he would destroy other children's things and show signs of very aggressive behavior towards them. By 9 years old, his behavior only got worse. He'd be cruel to animals, shooting his dog with a BB gun or using Clorox to kill his goldfish. His father was quoted saying that his son had one emotion: anger. By age 15, he kidnapped a girl in Tempe, Arizona with a .22 caliber revolver. He then took her home, tied and taped her up, and raped her. Then he took her home where he threatened to kill her sisters if she ever told anyone about what happened. However, he was caught and sentenced to 15 years in prison for kidnapping and was placed on the sex offender list. Upon release in 2001, he moved to South Carolina to live with his mother. 2 years later, 4 people were shot to death inside of Superbikes Motorsports, a motorcycle shop in South Carolina. The victims being the owner, the service manager, the mechanic, and the bookkeeper. Cole was known to have a terrible history with the workers of this shop, with the owner's wife describing him as being a disgruntled customer who visited the shop frequently. Then things went silent until August of 2016 when Kayla Brown and her boyfriend, Charles David Carver, suddenly vanished after going to Colehep's house to clean it. A few days later, investigators found the two after tracing their last known phone signals, leading them to the house. It was there where they found Carver dead, with multiple gunshot wounds and inside of Colehep's shed. They found Brown chained to a shark cage, unharmed but scared. She told them how she watched Colehep shoot Carver for having a smart mouth, and before locking her in the shed, adding that he didn't hurt her because she had done nothing wrong. Following Colehep's arrest, 2 more bodies were found on his property, and he later confessed to the motorcycle shop murders, bringing his body count to 7. His first court date was scheduled for early 2017.
Stephen Port, also dubbed the Grinder Killer, was a British serial killer who used dating sites to lure in his victims between 2014 and 2015. His first victim was Anthony Walgate, an escort he had met at Barking Station who eventually accompanied him back to his flat. 2 days later, Walgate was found dead on the streets in front of Port's property. However, the connection between the two initially went unnoticed. After this, between August of 2014 and September of the next year, Port continued to meet people on the dating app Grindr, with 2 of his victims, Gabriel Kovari and Daniel Whitworth, meeting him only weeks apart from each other. Once both men were murdered, Port planted a fake suicide note on Whitworth, making it seem like he killed Kovari and then killed himself out of guilt. Eventually, he met his final victim, Jack Taylor, whom he murdered and left in a churchyard not far from his home. Post-mortem examination showed the use of a number of different drugs on his victims, but what stood out the most was a date rape drug that Port would put into the drinks of all his victims to knock them out. Police were eventually able to connect Port with the various murders, and in November of 2016, he was found guilty of both sexual assault and murder, and is now carrying out a life sentence.